The world used to hum with invitations, conversations, faces, ideas. Now it feels like the sound has thinned, as if life itself has dimmed the lights. Yet beneath that quiet, something more intelligent is moving. The attention that once scattered toward others begins to fold inward, not in rejection, but in recalibration. It's not boredom, it's a withdrawal of energy from illusion, an instinctive call to see from the center rather than from the noise. Disinterest isn't escape. It's the soul pulling energy from illusion to recognize itself. Most human interest operates on invisible contracts. We trade attention for validation, curiosity for identity. We think we're connecting, but what we often experience is an echo chamber built from mutual expectations. You speak to maintain the image someone holds of you. They respond to protect the reflection they see in your eyes. What feels like intimacy is frequently the mind-seeking confirmation that it still exists as a separate self. The stage of life thrives on these exchanges, roles meeting roles, characters colliding under the pretense of understanding. When the spark of fascination fades, it can seem like the world has grown dull. But the dullness is diagnostic. It points to the exhaustion of a system that has been overperforming, the mind trying to sustain interest through imitation of aliveness. You notice the repetition in conversations, the predictability in people's stories, the looping narratives that once felt engaging. The scenery hasn't changed, your awareness has. The fabric that once caught the light of your attention no longer does, because you've begun to see the threads instead of the pattern. The illusion of mental connection rests on the assumption that meaning is created by interaction. But when observation deepens, you begin to sense that meaning arises from coherence, not conversation. You used to align your thoughts with others to feel seen. Now you start recognizing the observer who doesn't need to be mirrored. The withdrawal from social fascination is not cynicism. It's the natural detox of awareness, freeing itself from codependent thinking. There is a subtle addiction in staying mentally entangled with others. It gives the illusion of movement, the brain firing, comparing, analyzing. But beneath that surface traffic lies an unacknowledged fatigue, the weariness of constantly maintaining relevance within the collective narrative. Every thought about what others think of you, every mental rehearsal of belonging costs a piece of inner stillness. When the energy system senses depletion, it begins to reclaim its own attention. The result feels like disinterest, but it's actually restoration. You haven't lost interest in people. You've lost interest in the psychological choreography that once defined your connections. The masks that exchanged comfort for authenticity no longer fit. The conversations built from shared defense mechanisms start to feel like noise. What remains isn't emptiness. It's the spaciousness before new forms of presence appear. The mind resists this phase because it equates stillness with loss. It tells you that something is wrong. You're becoming detached. You're isolating. You're losing empathy. But that's the voice of the character trying to survive beyond its expiration. True observation doesn't remove empathy. It refines it. Instead of reacting to stories, you start perceiving essence. You no longer need to fix or please. You simply witness. Science would describe this as a change in frequency, the neural circuitry shifting from reactive patterns to coherent signaling. Emotionally, it feels like a quiet liberation. The nervous system, no longer overstimulated by constant evaluation, begins to rest. Your attention becomes less magnetic to drama and more attuned to subtlety. In that shift, the outer world seems to slow, but only because your perception has stopped chasing momentum. It's tempting to interpret this withdrawal as a phase to overcome, as though you need to rejoin the world with renewed enthusiasm. But that impulse belongs to the old paradigm, the one where worth was measured by engagement. What if this stillness isn't a problem but an initiation? What if the fading of interest is consciousness resetting its sensory field, preparing you to perceive reality without filters? When you observe this with curiosity rather than fear, a strange clarity emerges. You realize how much of human connection depends on mutual distraction. We meet others at the level of our unhealed attention, trying to escape ourselves through conversation, validation, or shared outrage. When those hooks fall away, you encounter the space between thoughts, where presence begins to breathe. The paradox is that losing interest in the world allows you to finally see it. Without the compulsion to engage, perception becomes transparent. The faces that once felt like performances now appear as energies moving through form. You start noticing how words carry different weights depending on the speaker's inner state, how silence between people often communicates more truth than speech. Observation turns from analysis into attunement. This stage is not the end of connection, but the cleansing of its illusion. Think of it as removing static from a signal. Once the interference fades, real resonance becomes possible. You no longer seek people who stimulate your mind. You gravitate toward those who harmonize with your frequency. Interaction becomes less about agreement and more about coherence, less about being understood and more about being present. The illusion of mental connection kept you in orbit around identity. The loss of interest is the gravity pulling you back toward essence. It asks you to see that the mind's version of relationship was built from scarcity. I need your attention to exist. Awareness is reversing that equation. It now whispers, I exist, therefore attention can rest. You didn't lose interest in people. You lost interest in the character that was performing for them. There comes a quiet reorientation when the attention that once scattered across others begins to turn inward, not in introspection as the mind understands it, but in a subtler way, like light realizing it no longer needs a surface to reflect upon. The apparent disconnection from the world reveals a deeper connection with awareness itself. It is as if consciousness begins to watch itself breathe, unhurried, unadorned, no longer hypnotized by the next event to interpret. At first, this can feel like standing in an unfamiliar landscape. The world seems the same, yet the texture of perception changes. The things that once pulled your attention now drift through the field like clouds that no longer know how to cast shadows. The observer is not detached, it's newly awake. It has ceased to chase meaning through stories and begun to sense meaning through presence. What was once effortful, trying to be mindful, trying to stay aware, dissolves into something spontaneous. Observation starts to happen by itself. This awakening isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with visions or revelations. It unfolds quietly through absence. The absence of commentary, of urgency, of the endless need to label. You realize how much of your attention had been spent narrating life rather than living it. The voice that used to interpret every moment grows softer, as if humbled by the vastness it used to claim ownership over. Silence becomes a teacher more eloquent than any philosophy. In that silence, awareness begins to stabilize. It no longer flickers between inner and outer worlds because it sees that both arise within the same field. The mind, which once believed it was the witness, now appears as one of the things being witnessed. The observer awakens not by gaining control, but by losing interest in control altogether. That surrender is what reveals its power, the unshakable capacity to notice without distortion. From a scientific lens, you could say the brain is shifting from high beta activity, alert, analytical, survival-driven, into alpha and theta rhythms, which correspond to openness and coherence. From a conscious perspective, it feels like space widening behind your eyes. Thoughts still come, but they no longer build walls around perception. Each one appears, glows for a moment, and passes through like sound, dissolving into air. You start to sense that observation itself has a texture, soft yet vast, intimate yet impersonal. This awareness doesn't seek stimulation because it no longer mistakes experience for identity. The observer has no hunger for excitement. Its nourishment is clarity. It watches even boredom with curiosity, realizing that what we call boredom is simply attention, meeting the absence of novelty. Without judgment, that absence becomes luminous. You notice the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of your breath, the weight of stillness in the room, details once filtered out by a mind addicted to narrative. As this perception deepens, a subtle joy emerges, not the emotional high of achievement, but the quiet gladness of simply being aware. It's a joy without object, uncaused and unclaimed. The world begins to appear less as a series of events and more as a dance of frequencies within a single conscious field. The observer recognizes itself as the screen upon which everything happens, yet untouched by the motion it displays. This shift can unsettle the personality because it undermines the usual sense of self. The mind, accustomed to defining who you are through reaction, now faces its own redundancy. It will try to reassert control by asking, "Who is observing?" and "How can I stay in this state?" But observation doesn't belong to anyone. The I that asks the question is merely another object being seen. The awareness watching it is not a character, it is the stage itself. When this recognition matures, perception becomes incredibly simple. You stop dividing life into inner and outer, self and other, sacred and ordinary. A conversation, a walk, a pause, all share the same luminosity. You start sensing that every form of movement is a modulation of stillness, every sound a ripple in silence. The observer no longer seeks transcendence, it becomes transparent. There's a moment when you realize you're not observing from behind your eyes anymore. You are the field in which the eyes appear. This inversion of perspective changes everything. Life stops being something you experience and starts being something you are. The boundary between you and the moment dissolves, and with it, the tension that once powered striving. From here, compassion arises naturally, not as an ethic, but as perception. You see the confusion in others, not as flaw, but as the same energy still asleep within form. You don't try to fix them, you simply see them clearly, and that seeing itself becomes healing, because clarity is contagious. The awakened observer doesn't withdraw from life, it blesses it by seeing through it. When attention no longer chases stimulation, it rests in coherence. You feel aligned without needing purpose, alive without needing validation. Observation becomes creation. The very act of seeing reorganizes what is seen. The field adjusts to the clarity of the observer, like water taking the shape of the vessel that contains it. This is why ancient mystics said the pure gaze transforms the world, not by intention but by resonance. In that understanding, every moment becomes sacred by its very visibility. There is nothing to attain, nothing to repair, nothing to keep. The observer that awakens is not an improvement of the self, but the remembrance that awareness was never asleep, only dreaming of being someone who had to wake up. When the gaze stops searching, it finally begins to see. When attention stops chasing experience, something extraordinary begins to happen, not outside but within the structure of perception itself. The energy that once fragmented across desires, worries, and narratives quietly returns home. The mind, relieved of its endless projects, stops vibrating in contradiction. What remains is coherence, a felt alignment between awareness and being. This is not detachment, it's reintegration. The observer that awakened now stabilizes into presence, a state that doesn't need to hold or release anything. Presence is not something you do, it's what naturally remains when effort dissolves. The self that used to push toward goals and pull away from discomfort begins to lose its authority. You feel the subtle tension of trying to be present fade into something weightless, like exhaling after years of holding your breath. This calm doesn't exclude life, it reorganizes it. The mind's noise no longer directs your perception. It's absorbed into a wider rhythm that includes everything. In this stillness, the body becomes an instrument of sensing rather than reaction. You might notice your breathing slowing, the pulse settling into a soft, even tempo. The nervous system learns to trust quiet again. What used to feel like emptiness reveals itself as richness, layers of subtle movement, warmth, and intelligence beneath thought. This is the field of coherence that ancient traditions called the heart-mind, a unity that science now measures in terms of resonance between brain and cardiac rhythms. Presence, quite literally, reorders physiology. The reordering extends to the subtle geometry of your relationships. When energy stops leaking into mental rehearsal, into what to say and how to be perceived and what they think, there's suddenly more bandwidth for direct perception. You begin to sense people not through analysis but through resonance. Some conversations now feel effortlessly balanced, as if you were tuning to the same chord. Others dissolve naturally without friction or judgment. What you once called losing interest now reveals itself as discernment, the body's intelligence aligning with coherence. From this perspective, the world no longer appears chaotic but patterned, like waves returning to a single tide. The circumstances of your life haven't changed, but your position within them has. You've stopped standing against the current, you've merged with it. Paradoxically, this surrender brings strength. Presence isn't passive, it's precise. Every gesture, word, and silence carries a frequency of clarity that subtly reorganizes whatever it touches. The people around you may not understand what shifted, but they'll feel it. Conversations slow, tone softens, and authenticity begins to echo between words. You start to realize that the reorganizing power of presence isn't mystical, it's practical coherence. When the inner field becomes ordered, external patterns mirror that order. Decisions that once felt complex now emerge spontaneously, like a compass aligning to north without debate. You're no longer forcing outcomes, you're allowing precision. The universe, which once seemed indifferent, now behaves like an intelligent partner that moves in rhythm with your awareness. At this level, silence becomes a creative force. You discover that not speaking, not reacting, not rushing, doesn't mean doing nothing. It means giving space for the intelligence of the field to act through you. It's the difference between stirring the water to see your reflection and letting it settle so the image becomes clear. Presence doesn't impose change. It reveals what was always in motion. The reorganizing field of presence has a signature feeling: neutrality. Not indifference, but balance. Things happen, emotions arise, but they no longer throw you off center. You experience sadness without collapse, joy without clinging, uncertainty without panic. This neutrality is not coldness, it's the warmth of stability. When the inner system is coherent, the world's chaos stops being personal. You sense the hidden order beneath events, as if reality were recalibrating itself around your stillness. This stability allows creativity to reappear in its pure form. Instead of acting from compulsion, you act from listening. Ideas arrive without strain, timing aligns without planning, synchronicities increase. The more you rest in this alignment, the more evident it becomes that life itself is responsive to attention. Every thought, every gesture of presence sends ripples through the field. The question is no longer, what should I do? But from what frequency am I doing it? And yet, the ego will occasionally try to reclaim control. It may whisper that you're being passive, that you're falling behind, that you need to make something happen. When that occurs, notice it as part of the same reordering, the remnants of an old operating system trying to update itself. The difference now is that you don't need to uninstall it, you just observe. The moment you see the impulse without fusing with it, presence reclaims command. Awareness doesn't fight the mind, it absorbs it. This is the quiet revolution of coherence. The world outside begins to adjust to the frequency of your seeing. Relationships stabilize, timing improves, even coincidences become orchestral. The external reflects the internal not as reward, but as resonance. You begin to live less as a participant in events and more as the still axis around which events spin. The paradox is luminous. The less you try to manage life, the more gracefully it arranges itself. The world hasn't vanished, it has folded itself into the dimension of your presence. As you sense this truth, take a moment, right now, to notice where your energy is resting. Is it scattered in thought or gathered in awareness? Feel the gentle pulse behind your chest, the simple fact of existing without needing to prove it. That's presence, reordering the field from within. If something in you recognizes this movement, this quiet return to coherence, write in the comments, "The center is awake." It's not a declaration, it's a signal to your own awareness that you've begun to sense the field realigning. Each time someone else writes it, the resonance amplifies. Proof that observation, shared consciously, is already reorganizing the world. When the field of presence settles into coherence, something begins to hum beneath perception. A vibration so subtle it feels like silence wearing rhythm. It isn't the return of old interests or ambitions, it's a new texture of attention, one that doesn't grasp but radiates. The mind, no longer starved for stimulation, becomes transparent enough for life to flow through it. What used to be effort now feels like participation. You sense that reality is listening, not as an audience but as a mirror that adjusts to your frequency. This new frequency isn't a reward for inner work, It's the natural baseline of awareness when resistance stops consuming energy. Before, your mind was like a radio caught between stations, static of comparison, judgment, self-doubt. Now the signal has tuned itself. The clarity you feel isn't just emotional relief, it's vibrational precision. The brain, heart, and body are no longer competing for control, they're moving in concert. Thought slows enough for intuition to speak in its native language, simplicity. At first, this state can seem strangely quiet. There's less compulsion to engage in the drama of others, fewer urges to prove, defend, or explain. Some people around you may interpret your calm as detachment, but that's because they still measure aliveness through reaction. The truth is that your system has recalibrated from noise to harmony. You don't withdraw from the world. You meet it on a subtler bandwidth, one where the essential communicates without words. You start noticing how energy responds before language does. A room feels different when you enter it with coherence. Conversations soften without your effort. The tone of your presence becomes your message. This is the beginning of relational resonance, interaction no longer driven by need, but by frequency alignment. You don't seek people who understand you. You magnetize those who vibrate in the same clarity. Encounters feel effortless, not because you're avoiding friction, but because truth has replaced performance. From a physical perspective, this coherence is measurable. Studies of heart-brain synchronization show that when internal rhythms align, external interactions follow suit. Emotional stability, intuition, and communication all sharpen, but beyond data, there's a lived sense that life has started moving with you rather than against you. The coincidences that appear are not accidents, they're harmonics, the universe echoing your new wavelength. What once seemed like chance now feels like dialogue. In this field, interest returns, but it's no longer curiosity born from emptiness. It's life's curiosity about itself through you. The impulse to create, connect, or explore doesn't arise from restlessness but from overflow. You feel drawn to people or projects not because they promise fulfillment, but because they resonate with the frequency of your own being. This is the difference between seeking meaning and expressing meaning. The former drains, the latter generates. There's an unmistakable lightness in this phase. The need to categorize experiences as spiritual or ordinary dissolves. Everything participates in the same flow. The way sunlight lands on a countertop, the quiet between sentences, the pulse of insight that appears mid-breath. You start realizing that awareness isn't inside you. You are inside awareness. And because of that, every movement, no matter how small, carries the same sanctity as meditation. The new frequency refines perception beyond dualities. You no longer divide the day into moments of progress and moments of failure. Both are waves within the same tide. Even pain starts to reveal texture, not as punishment, but as compression, the way sound tightens before resonance expands. You begin to listen to discomfort as information rather than resistance. The body itself becomes an instrument of translation, turning every sensation into feedback from consciousness. It's here that the concept of relationship transforms completely. Instead of searching for compatibility through personality, you recognize resonance through stillness. You meet people not at the surface of dialogue, but in the silent undercurrent that precedes words. You start sensing who is aligned not by agreement, but by the ease in your nervous system when you're near them. The soul's compass has replaced the social algorithm. This doesn't mean you isolate yourself from difference. It means you relate from coherence. You can sit in the presence of dissonance without absorbing it, because your attention no longer vibrates in reaction. Observation itself becomes a stabilizing force. The field of your awareness reorganizes the energy around it simply by existing in balance. This is the deeper science behind compassion. Not emotional endurance, but vibrational integrity. As you live in this frequency, creativity becomes indistinguishable from observation. The clearer you see, the more reality rearranges to reflect that clarity. You're no longer trying to manifest from will. Manifestation becomes the natural consequence of coherence. The universe doesn't respond to your words, but to your waveform. When the signal is pure, response is immediate. This isn't magic. It's alignment between perception and possibility. Over time, you realize that the greatest act of connection is maintaining frequency. Every thought of fear, every indulgence in cynicism is not moral failure but a temporary distortion in the field. You don't fight it, you retune. Attention becomes both your instrument and your sanctuary. You start to measure success not by outcomes, but by how quickly you return to stillness after movement. The new frequency doesn't promise perpetual bliss. It offers something sturdier, consistency. The highs and lows still come, but they pass through a center that no longer wavers. This stability becomes magnetic. People sense it even if they can't name it. Some are drawn to it instinctively, others may resist because it reveals their own dissonance. Either way, your role is not to convert, but to hold signal. Presence, when coherent, is instruction enough. You don't search for affinity. You become the frequency that attracts what is already harmonic. This is the quiet mastery of observation. Interest hasn't disappeared. It has evolved into resonance. What once looked like disconnection was the recalibration required for a higher symmetry. When life hums at this level, nothing feels random. Each moment appears as the perfect chord of consciousness tuning itself through you. Losing interest was never the end. It was the threshold. Beyond the fading noise of fascination lies the quiet power of pure observation. When you no longer cling to experience, reality stops performing and begins to reveal itself. What was once fragmented becomes whole. What once demanded meaning now emanates it. The observer doesn't control life, it clarifies it, allowing the real to unfold without distortion. True observation neither holds nor rejects. It recognizes the whole in every passing form. If this message resonated with you, like this video and write "I see" from the center in the comments, so I know you stayed until the end. And if you want to keep exploring consciousness and observation at this depth, subscribe for more journeys like this one.